The blade pressed against Clara Bennett's throat just as the church bells began to toll. She could feel cold steel biting into her skin, a thin trickle of warmth sliding down her neck, where the edge had already drawn blood. Rain hammered against the carriage roof, drowning out her ragged breathing. The man holding the knife smelled of damp wool and stale ale, his breath hot against her ear. "You will keep your mouth shut," he hissed. "You will walk into that cathedral. You will speak your vows. And if anyone suspects you are not Lady Victoria Ashcroft, you will not live to see the morning. Do you understand?" Clara's mind raced, struggling to make sense of the nightmare that had consumed her life in a single hour. She had been running through the storm, clutching her father's journal to her chest, desperate to escape men who had pursued her through dark village streets. She had stumbled upon the ambushed carriage purely by accident. Horses screaming, driver slumped with an arrow through his shoulder, door hanging open as rain poured inside. She had only wanted to help. Instead, rough hands seized her from behind. A cloth soaked in something sweet and cloying pressed over her mouth and nose. When she awakened, she wore a wedding gown that cost more than she earned in a lifetime, her hands bound with silk ribbons, her head pounding. Now she understood why. The real Lady Victoria Ashcroft was gone. Spirited away into the storm by men who intended to use Clara as a replacement, a placeholder bride to cover their crime. But Clara was not chosen at random. She did not know it yet, but the men who grabbed her had been following her for 2 days. They knew exactly who she was. They knew about her father's journal, and they had been instructed to kill her before she reached the authorities. The carriage ambush had been a complication. Their original plan, intercept Clara on the road and make her disappearance look like a robbery, had fallen apart when she stumbled into their other operation. Now they had 2 problems, a kidnapped bride and a witness who needed to die. The man who held the knife, a scarred enforcer named Gideon Cross, had made a quick decision. He could solve both problems at once. Clara would serve as the bride, buying them time to deal with Victoria. And once the wedding was complete, Clara could be disposed of quietly, her death blamed on a tragic accident. The Duke was blind. He would never know the difference. "Last chance," Gideon growled, withdrawing the knife and shoving her toward the carriage door. "Speak your vows clearly. Sign the register as Victoria Margaret Ashcroft. Do not hesitate, and do not let anyone see your face too clearly before the ceremony." The carriage door swung open. A footman in crimson livery extended his gloved hand. Clara clutched the bouquet of white roses someone had thrust into her trembling fingers, and forced herself to walk forward. The cathedral doors loomed before her, massive and ancient. She could feel the weight of her borrowed veil pressing against her hair, the heavy satin train dragging through puddles. Every step felt like walking toward her own execution. And then the doors swung open. The cathedral erupted before her, a vast cavern of candlelight and shadow, packed with hundreds of guests who rose to their feet as one. The organ swelled. 1,000 eyes turned toward her. The aisle stretched ahead like a river of crimson carpet, leading inexorably toward the altar where a man stood waiting. Alexander Ravenshire, the Duke of Thornwood. He was taller than she had expected, his broad shoulders filling the formal black coat he wore. His dark hair was swept back from his face, and his eyes, his famous blind eyes, were fixed on some point in the middle distance, unseeing yet somehow piercing. A faint scar traced along his left temple, the only visible remnant of the assassination attempt that had stolen his sight 5 years ago. He stood perfectly still, his right hand resting on the shoulder of a liveried attendant, not a cane, for he had learned to navigate by touch rather than by tapping, his expression unreadable. Clara walked down the aisle with her heart hammering against her ribs. The rain had soaked her cloak, plastering her hair to her face. The veil, deliberately chosen to be thicker than customary, Gideon had made sure of that, obscured her features just enough, and the guests, as instructed, had been told that the bride was exhausted from her journey and wished for privacy. The bishop had been advised beforehand that the ceremony must be conducted with minimal direct interaction. Gideon had been thorough. Clara reached the altar. The bishop, an ancient man with a face like crumpled parchment, began to intone the opening words. His voice rolled over her like distant thunder, and she found herself turning to face Alexander Ravenshire as though trapped in a dream. Do you, Alexander Charles Edmund Ravenshire, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The Duke's voice was low and steady. I do. And do you, Victoria Margaret Ashcroft, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara opened her mouth. The lie was right there, waiting on her tongue. But as she stared into the unseeing eyes of the man she was about to deceive, something twisted painfully in her chest. Her father had raised her to value truth above all else. He had been a physician, a man of science and integrity, who believed that honesty was the foundation of every healing. He had died for the truth, murdered for secrets he had refused to bury. In the corner of her eye, she saw Gideon step forward, his hand moving toward something beneath his coat. I do, Clara whispered. The bishop continued. Rings were exchanged, a heavy gold band that felt like a manacle on her finger. Prayers were spoken, blessings were given, and then the bishop smiled and declared them husband and wife. The cathedral erupted in applause. Alexander extended his arm toward her, his expression still unreadable. Shall we, Lady Ravenshire? His voice resonated through the air between them. No warmth, but no hostility either. Only a kind of weary resignation. Clara took his arm. Beneath the damp fabric, she could feel corded muscle. He was stronger than he appeared, more solid. And despite the attendant who stepped aside as she approached, Alexander moved with the controlled precision of a man who had learned to navigate a world he could no longer see. They walked down the aisle together. The doors swung open. The storm had intensified. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the courtyard in stark flashes of white. The carriage that waited bore the Ravenshire crest, its horses stamping impatiently. Alexander helped her into the carriage with surprising gentleness, his hand finding hers unerringly despite his blindness. He climbed in beside her, settled into the velvet seat opposite, and rapped once against the roof. The carriage lurched into motion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Clara sat frozen, her borrowed wedding gown pooling around her, her heart still pounding. She was married. She was a duchess. She was a fraud. And somewhere in the storm, the men who forced her into this deception were waiting. We are alone now, Alexander said quietly. Clara's breath caught. His tone had changed. The formal stiffness was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Something that sounded almost like curiosity. So perhaps you would like to tell me, he continued, who you really are. The words hung in the air between them, like a physical blow. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Your Grace, please. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. I may be blind, but I am not a fool. He raised his hand, ticking off points on his fingers. First, Lady Victoria wears a particular perfume, gardenia and amber. It is distinct enough that I have always been able to identify her presence in a room before she speaks. You smell of lavender soap and chalk dust. Even rain cannot wash that away completely. Second, when Victoria takes a man's arm, she grips it, firmly, possessively, as though claiming territory. Your touch was hesitant, uncertain. The touch of someone who has never walked on a duke's arm before. Third, and most telling, when I spoke my vows, Victoria was supposed to squeeze my hand twice. It was a signal we arranged beforehand, a small act of solidarity between two people who did not wish to marry, but had agreed to do so anyway. You did nothing. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. He had known. From the very first moment, he had known. Then why did you go through with the ceremony? Alexander's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Because creating a scene in front of the bishop, the king's representative, and half the nobility of England, would have served no one. Because I needed time to understand what was happening, and because I suspect you are in as much danger as I am. Clara's throat tightened. You know about the attack? I know that Victoria's carriage was ambushed. I know that my bride was taken. And I know someone went to considerable effort to ensure the wedding proceeded regardless. He tilted his head, listening. What I do not know is who you are, or whether you are a willing participant or another victim. I am not their accomplice. Clara's voice broke. I was running from men who have been hunting me for days. I stumbled upon the ambushed carriage. They grabbed me, drugged me. When I woke up, I was wearing this dress, and they told me if I did not go through with the wedding, they would kill me." She told him everything. About her father, about the journal, about the men pursuing her for reasons she still did not fully understand, the knife at her throat, the threats, the terrible moment when she stood at the altar and spoke a vow she knew was a lie. Alexander listened in silence. When she finished, he leaned back against his seat. "Your father was Philip Bennett." It was not a question. Clara's heart lurched. "You knew him. He was my physician, the best I ever had." Alexander's voice softened. "He saved my life after the assassination attempt. The court physicians said I would die from the poison on the arrow. Your father spent 3 days at my bedside, barely sleeping. He was a good man." "He was murdered," Clara whispered. 2 years ago. Everyone said it was a robbery, but I never believed it. He had been afraid for weeks before he died, saying he had discovered something terrible. And you have been carrying his evidence ever since." "The journal." Clara nodded, pressing her hand against her chest, where the small leather-bound book was still concealed beneath her gown. "He hid it among my childhood books. I found it 3 months ago. I have been trying to decipher it ever since." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. The carriage swayed as it turned onto a rougher road. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "Someone wanted this marriage to proceed, but with a woman they could control. They intended to eliminate Victoria, install you as a puppet duchess, and then dispose of you once you had served your purpose." He paused. "The conspiracy your father discovered is still active." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "What do we do now?" "Now we arrive at Ravenshire Castle. You will continue to play the role of my wife. I will continue to play the role of a blind fool who does not realize he has been deceived." He leaned forward. "The people who arranged this are inside my household. They have been for years. Now that you have disrupted their plans, they will be desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as a partner." Despite his blindness, his eyes seemed to find hers with unsettling accuracy. "You need protection. I need answers. Together, we might uncover the truth about your father's murder and the conspiracy threatening my family." The carriage slowed as it approached a massive iron gate. Through the rain-streaked window, Clara could see the silhouette of Ravenshire Castle rising against the storm, towers and battlements, and dozens of lighted windows gleaming like watchful eyes. She had entered this marriage as a prisoner. Now she was being offered the chance to become something else. "Yes," she said quietly, "I can do that." Alexander nodded once, then reached across the carriage to take her hand. "Then welcome to Ravenshire Castle, Lady Ravenshire. Whatever happens next, remember this. You are not alone anymore, and neither am I." The carriage passed through the gates. The first attempt on Clara's life came before she had spent a full night beneath Ravenshire's roof. She was shown to her chambers by a silent housekeeper, who introduced herself as Mrs. Grimshaw. The room was vast and cold, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in crimson velvet. Portraits of long-dead Ravenshire ancestors stared down with varying expressions of severity. "Supper will be served in the great hall at 8 o'clock, Mrs. Grimshaw announced, her tone making it clear she considered this information a generous concession. "His Grace prefers to dine privately. You will eat alone." "Thank you," Clara said. Mrs. Grimshaw's lips thinned. She turned and swept from the room, her black skirts rustling like the wings of a departing crow. Clara stood alone in the vast chamber, still wearing her borrowed wedding gown. She needed to get out of this dress, but the buttons ran down the back in a long, tortuous line, each one a tiny pearl that defied her trembling fingers. A soft knock at the door made her jump. A young woman stepped inside, perhaps 18 or 19, with a round, cheerful face and ginger curls that refused to be contained by her maid's cap. Her eyes widened at Clara's disheveled state. "Oh, Your Grace, you should have rung for me. I am so sorry. I am Daisy, Your Grace, your lady's maid." "I have a lady's maid?" "Of course, Your Grace. Every duchess has a lady's maid." Daisy hesitated. "Did no one tell you?" No one has told me very much at all, Clara admitted, including how to remove this dress. Daisy crossed the room with quick, efficient steps. Within moments, the gown loosened, and Clara could breathe again. Thank you, Clara said, clutching the bodice to her chest. I was beginning to think I would have to sleep in it. Daisy smiled, a genuine smile, warm and open. That would have been a shame, Your Grace. It is a beautiful gown. It is not my gown, Clara said, before she could stop herself. Daisy's hands paused. Your Grace? Clara's mind raced. I mean that it was chosen for me. By others. I had very little say in the matter. Daisy's expression cleared. Ah, arranged marriages are like that, I hear. His Grace's mother arranged everything before she passed. God rest her soul. Yes, Clara murmured. Very particular. Daisy helped her into a dressing gown of pale blue silk and set about unpinning her hair. Would you like me to bring a supper tray, Your Grace? It is a long walk to the great hall, and you look exhausted. I am supposed to dine there at 8. Daisy made a soft sound of disapproval. Mrs. Grimshaw's orders? Yes. Mrs. Grimshaw has been housekeeper here for 40 years. She believes tradition is more important than common sense. Daisy lowered her voice. She also believes any woman who marries His Grace is an intruder who must be tested. Then I should not give her the satisfaction of hiding in my room. Clara squared her shoulders. I will dine in the great hall, but perhaps you could help me find something suitable to wear that is less bridal. The great hall of Ravenshire Castle soared 30 feet above Clara's head, supported by massive oak beams darkened with age. Tapestries covered the stone walls. A fireplace large enough to roast an ox blazed at one end. A long table stretched the length of the hall, polished to a mirror shine. It was also completely empty. Clara stood in the doorway, her borrowed emerald gown rustling around her ankles. Before she could decide whether to retreat, a voice came from behind her. Your Grace. She spun to find a man emerging from the shadows, tall and thin, with sharp features and dark hair slicked back from a high forehead. His black coat and white cravat suggested precision and control. I am Mr. Finch, he said, executing a bow that was technically perfect, but somehow conveyed contempt. His Grace's steward. I was not informed you would be dining in the great hall tonight. Clara's chin lifted. I was informed supper is served here at 8 o'clock. His Grace dines privately. The great hall is for the Duchess to use as she sees fit. Clara surprised herself with her own boldness. I am the Duchess now, am I not? Mr. Finch's expression flickered. Something dark passed through his eyes before being suppressed. Of course, Your Grace. I will have the kitchen send up a tray immediately. A tray? I do not wish to eat from a tray in my room like an invalid. I wish to dine properly, at the table, as is my right. The steward's jaw tightened. As you wish, Your Grace. Though I must warn you, the kitchen staff is not prepared. Then I suggest you prepare them. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Clara refused to look away. She was tired of being afraid. And something about Mr. Finch's cold, calculating gaze made her certain that showing weakness to this man would be a fatal mistake. Very well, Mr. Finch said at last, his voice like ice. Supper will be served within the hour. He bowed and retreated, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Clara waited until she was certain he was gone, before she allowed herself to exhale. Excellent performance. She whirled. Alexander stood in a doorway hidden behind one of the tapestries, leaning against the frame, an attendant just behind him. Your Grace, I did not see you there. That was rather the point. He stepped into the hall, his hand brushing the wall to orient himself. I wanted to see how you would handle Finch. He has been testing you since you arrived. The empty hall, the missing servants, the insistence that you eat alone, all of it was designed to see if you would accept being treated as an inconvenience. Clara frowned. How do you know what he did? Because I know Finch. I have known him for 15 years. He was my father's steward before he was mine. Alexander's expression darkened. And I have suspected for some time that he is not as loyal as he pretends. You think he is involved in the conspiracy? I think he is involved in something. I have simply never been able to prove it. Alexander gestured toward the long table. Shall we dine together? You do not stare at me as though I am either an invalid or a monster. I find that remarkably refreshing. Before Clara could respond, the doors at the far end burst open. A footman stumbled through, his livery disheveled, his face white. Your Grace, there has been an accident. In the kitchen, the taster, the man who samples your food, he collapsed. He is convulsing. The physician says it is poison. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The supper she had demanded only minutes ago had been poisoned. If she had eaten it, if she had not been delayed by her conversation with Alexander. Who prepared the food? Alexander's voice was calm but steely. The cook, Your Grace, and her assistants, but no one else. Lock down the kitchen. No one leaves. I want every servant questioned, every ingredient examined. He turned toward Clara, his unseeing eyes somehow finding her face. It seems your enemies are more impatient than I anticipated. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. They wanted to kill me before I could tell anyone the truth. Yes. But they have failed, and now they have revealed themselves. His hand found hers in the darkness. Whatever happens next, we face it together. The next 3 days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Clara barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards sent her heart racing. She ate only food that Daisy prepared in the small kitchen attached to the Duchess's chambers. She never walked anywhere alone, and she watched everyone with the desperate vigilance of a woman who knew her survival depended on seeing danger before it saw her. But beneath the fear, she found herself increasingly drawn to Alexander. He was nothing like the man she had expected. She had assumed, based on gossip and newspaper accounts, that the Duke of Thornwood was a tragic figure, a broken recluse who had retreated from the world after losing his sight. The reality was more complicated. Alexander ran his estate with an iron grip, reviewing accounts and making decisions based on reports read aloud by his secretary. He corresponded with politicians and fellow nobles. He was not broken, he was adapted. A man who had learned to see the world through sound and touch, and the information gathered by a network of loyal servants. And he knew the name of every servant in his household. He remembered their families, their illnesses, their personal struggles. He asked after Daisy's elderly mother and the cook's sick child. He reduced rents during hard harvests and paid for medical care when tenants fell ill. The servants did not fear him. They loved him. His enemies could not attack him openly. They had to work in shadows, recruiting traitors from within his own household. She was beginning to understand why. On the 4th morning, Clara was summoned to the library. She found Alexander seated near the window, his face turned toward the pale autumn sunlight. He wore a simple white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows. His secretary, a young man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, was reading aloud from a legal document. And the boundary dispute remains unresolved, though Mr. Carrington believes a settlement can be reached before winter sessions. Shall I draft a response, Your Grace? Yes. Tell Carrington to proceed, but remind him we will not cede more than the eastern pasture. Alexander tilted his head as Clara entered. Ah, my wife has arrived. Thank you, Mr. Harris. That will be all. The secretary withdrew. Clara waited until the door closed. You wish to see me? I have been making inquiries about your father. Alexander gestured toward the chair opposite him. I discovered something troubling. Clara's heart lurched. What? 2 years before his death, Philip Bennett treated a patient at the request of the Earl of Westbrook. A young woman, barely 18, found wandering the roads near the Earl's estate. Malnourished, incoherent, covered in bruises. Your father treated her injuries and reported the case to the local magistrate. 3 days later, the girl vanished. Clara felt a chill creep down her spine. Vanished? Officially, she was a vagrant who moved on, but your father never believed that. He continued investigating. He discovered similar disappearances had occurred on at least 4 other estates over the previous decade. Always young women, always vanishing without trace. He compiled evidence. He wrote letters, and then he died. Murdered, Clara whispered. Almost certainly. Alexander's jaw tightened. The night your father died, he was called to attend a patient at Thornwood Hall. Westbrook's country seat. The message said it was urgent. But when your father arrived, the servant was perfectly healthy. Someone lured him there, and while he was away, someone else broke into his study. They were looking for something they did not find, because you had it all along. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her chest, where the journal was still hidden. We need to decipher it. Yes, but we must be careful. He paused. Captain Blackwood has identified the source of the poison. A kitchen assistant, a boy named Thomas. He was found dead in the village yesterday morning. A note was found in his belongings, confessing, but the note is too convenient. The boy could barely write his name, yet the confession is in elegant script. Someone forced him to write it, or wrote it themselves. Precisely. Alexander reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Blackwood's men also found this in the boy's pocket. A gold signet ring. The crest is Westbrook's. A hawk clutching a serpent. Clara stared at the ring. The Earl of Westbrook, the man who summoned my father on the night he died. Yes, but a ring can be stolen. A crest can be forged. We must not jump to conclusions, no matter how tempting. But it fits. Everything fits. Too perfectly. Alexander turned the ring over in his fingers. Westbrook is a powerful man. He sits on the Privy Council. If he is involved, he would not be foolish enough to leave his personal signet ring in a dead kitchen boy's pocket. Unless someone wants us to believe Westbrook is guilty. Then what do? We continue investigating. Quietly. Captain Blackwood has sent a man to Thornwood Hall to ask questions about the disappearances. In the meantime, we focus on the journal. If we can break the code, we may find proof that cannot be dismissed. That evening, Clara sat alone in her chambers, the coded journal open on the desk before her. She had been studying it for hours, trying to find a pattern in the seemingly random letters and numbers. Her father had clearly designed this code to be unbreakable without the key. But what was the key? She was so absorbed that she did not hear the door open. "You are still awake?" Clara startled. Alexander stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark blue robe. His hair was slightly disheveled. "I could not sleep," she admitted. "Every time I think I see a pattern, it dissolves into chaos." Alexander moved into the room, his hand brushing the doorframe to orient himself. He found the chair opposite her desk without hesitation, and sat down. "May I see it?" Clara hesitated only a moment, before sliding the journal across the desk. He opened it carefully, his fingers tracing the edges of the pages. "Your father had beautiful handwriting. Elegant. Precise. The handwriting of a man who believed in order." "You can tell that just by touching." "I can tell many things just by touching." He smiled faintly. "When you lose one sense, the others become sharper. I can feel the pressure of the pen strokes." He paused, his brow furrowing. "There is something here. Indentations. Very faint. In the corner of every third page. They feel like numbers. Not part of the written text. Underneath it." Clara's heart began to race. Like a hidden message? Or a key? He slid the journal back. "Do you have a magnifying glass?" She hurried to the library, and returned moments later, with the glass clutched in her trembling fingers. Under magnification, the hidden numbers became visible. Pinpricks in the paper, one on every third page. 3, 7, 12, 19. Clara read aloud. "They are not dates, unless they refer to something else. Something your father would have known." And then Clara understood. "They are page numbers. Not from this journal. From another book. A book my father read to me when I was a child. De Humani Corporis Fabrica, by Andreas Vesalius. The 1543 edition. It was his most precious possession. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should take care of it." "Where is the book now?" Clara's heart sank. "In a trunk. In my cottage. The same cottage that was ransacked by the men hunting me." "Then we need to find out if it is still there." Alexander rose. "Captain Blackwood has men who can search the cottage. If the book remains, they will find it. If not, we find another way." He reached out, his hand finding her shoulder with unerring accuracy. There was something fierce and protective in his expression that made her heart ache. "Thank you," she whispered. for believing me. You do not need to thank me, Clara. You are my wife. Whatever else may be true, that is not a lie, and I protect what is mine." The next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived. Clara was in the garden, attempting to clear her mind among the autumn roses, when she heard carriage wheels on the gravel drive. A magnificent black coach emblazoned with a crest she did not recognize, a lion, rampant on a field of gold, pulled up before the main entrance. A woman stepped out. She was tall and elegant, with golden hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure and a gown of deep burgundy silk. Her face was a perfect oval, her features delicate, and her green eyes surveyed the castle with cool assessment. Clara recognized her immediately from the portrait in the gallery. Lady Victoria Ashcroft. The real bride had returned. Clara slipped through the servants' corridors until she reached the main hall. From there, she could hear raised voices echoing through the ancient stone. "Where is he? Where is my husband?" Victoria's voice was sharp and imperious. Clara pressed herself against the wall and peered around the corner. Victoria stood in the center of the great hall, surrounded by bewildered servants. Mr. Finch was there, his expression carefully neutral, and Alexander was descending the main staircase, his hand resting on the balustrade, his steps measured. "Victoria," his voice was calm, "you are alive. We had feared the worst." "Alive? Of course I am alive." Victoria swept toward him. "I was kidnapped, Alexander, torn from my carriage by masked men, held captive in a dreadful farmhouse for days. I only escaped last night, and what did I discover? That you had married someone else." The ceremony proceeded as planned. A bride arrived at the cathedral. The bishop performed the rites. "I married the woman who was presented to me." "You married an impostor, a fraud, a commoner who stole my place." Victoria's voice rose. "The marriage is invalid. It must be annulled immediately. I am your wife, Alexander. I am the woman you promised to marry. I am aware of the situation." Alexander's voice remained steady. "And I am aware that you are distressed. Perhaps we should discuss this in private." "Private? There is nothing to discuss. That woman, whoever she is, must be arrested. She conspired with the kidnappers to steal my title, my fortune, my—" "Victoria," Alexander's voice cracked like a whip. "I said, we will discuss this in private. That is not a request." The hall fell silent. Victoria stared at him, her green eyes blazing, but she did not argue further. "Very well," she said coldly. "Lead the way." Alexander extended his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Victoria took it, and they ascended the staircase together. Clara watched them go, her heart sinking with every step. She retreated to the library, her sanctuary. She pulled a volume from the shelf, something about botany, and tried to lose herself in the words. It did not work. Her mind kept returning to Victoria's face, the fury in her eyes, the possessiveness in her voice when she had called Alexander her husband. The door opened, and Daisy slipped inside, her round face pale. "Your Grace, Lady Victoria is demanding to see you." "She is in the drawing room with His Grace. Mr. Finch sent me to fetch you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Both of them together?" "Yes, Your Grace." Daisy hesitated. "Be careful. Lady Victoria is very angry, and Mr. Finch seems pleased, like a cat who has cornered a mouse." Clara nodded slowly. She had noticed the same thing. Mr. Finch had been testing her since she arrived. Victoria's return was exactly the kind of opportunity he would exploit. "Thank you, Daisy." She rose. "If something happens, find Captain Blackwood. Tell him everything." She walked to the drawing room with the steady steps of a woman marching toward her own execution. Through the heavy oak door, she could hear voices. Victoria's sharp and demanding, Alexander's calm, Mr. Finch's smooth and unctuous. She pushed open the door. The drawing room was elegant, decorated in cream and gold. Victoria sat on a velvet settee, her burgundy skirts arranged around her. Alexander stood near the window, his back to the room. Mr. Finch hovered near the door, his thin lips curved in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Ah," Victoria said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The impostor arrives." Clara forced herself to meet Victoria's gaze. Lady Victoria, I am glad to see you are safe. Were you? How touching. Victoria rose, moving toward Clara, with predatory grace. Let me make something perfectly clear. You are nothing. A village schoolteacher, a commoner, a fraud. You have no right to the title you have stolen, no right to the husband you have deceived. The marriage will be annulled. You will be arrested. And I will take my rightful place as the Duchess of Thornwood. I understand your anger. You understand nothing. Victoria's voice was ice. I was raised for this. Every lesson, every accomplishment, every moment of my life has been preparation for becoming Alexander's wife. And you, some peasant who stumbled out of the rain, you think you can simply take what is mine? I did not take anything. I was forced. Silence. Victoria's hand lashed out, striking Clara across the face. The blow sent Clara staggering backward. Her cheek burned where Victoria's rings had cut into her skin. She grabbed the edge of a table to steady herself. That is enough. Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. He had turned from the window, his face cold and furious. Your Grace, I was merely... I said that is enough. He moved toward them, navigating the furniture without hesitation. He knew this room intimately. Lady Victoria, you are a guest in this house. You have suffered a terrible ordeal, and for that, you have my sympathy. But you will not strike my wife. Not in my presence. Not ever. Victoria's face contorted with rage. She is not your wife. She is a liar and a criminal. She is the Duchess of Thornwood. Alexander's voice was quiet, but carried more weight than any shout. She was wed to me in the sight of God and man. The vows were spoken, the register was signed. Until the church declares otherwise, she is my wife, and you will treat her with the respect that title demands. Victoria stared at him with pure, undiluted hatred. Then she swept from the room, her skirts billowing. Mr. Finch followed, pausing only to offer Clara a mocking bow. When they were gone, Alexander found Clara's arm. His touch was gentle. Are you all right? Yes. Clara touched her bleeding cheek. It is just a scratch. It is not just a scratch. She struck you in my home. His jaw tightened. Come, let me see to your wound. You cannot see anything. His lips twitched. I can feel it, then. Your cheek is bleeding. I can smell it. He led her to a chair and summoned a servant for water and bandages. When the supplies arrived, he insisted on cleaning the wound himself, his fingers moving with surprising gentleness. You are very good at this, Clara murmured. I have had practice. Your father taught me, actually. He said a man should know how to care for his own injuries, regardless of station. Clara's throat tightened. He believed knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. He was a remarkable man. Alexander resumed his work. Victoria is wrong. You are not nothing. You are brave and clever and kind, and you have more nobility in your smallest finger than she possesses in her entire being. I do not care that you are not the bride I was promised. I am grateful you are the bride I received. Clara could not speak. The words were tangled with emotions she did not dare name. Victoria will not stop, she whispered at last. She will find a way to destroy us. When she does, we will face it together. He leaned forward, and his lips brushed her forehead. You are my wife, Clara Bennett. Not Victoria, not anyone else. You, and I will not let anyone take you from me. The days that followed were a storm of whispered accusations. Victoria installed herself in one of the castle's finest guest chambers and proceeded to make herself as disagreeable as possible. She complained about everything. She demanded to be seated beside Alexander at every meal. She treated the servants with casual cruelty that made Clara's blood boil. But beneath the petty grievances, something darker was brewing. Mr. Finch watched Clara constantly, cold, calculating, patient. Servants who had been warm now looked at her with suspicion. Victoria had been spreading rumors, reminding everyone that Clara was an impostor. And Alexander grew distant, still kind, still protective, but wrestling with something he could not bring himself to share. On the 5th day, Clara finally confronted him in the library. Something is wrong. Tell me what it is. Alexander was silent for a long moment. Victoria has made an accusation. She claims you conspired with the kidnappers. That you arranged the ambush yourself to take her place. She says she has proof, a letter she claims you wrote to one of the men. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That is absurd. You know this. I know. His expression was troubled. But the letter exists. I held it in my hands. The handwriting is remarkably similar to yours. It cannot be. And yet it is. He leaned forward. Is there any possibility someone could have forged your handwriting? Clara's mind raced. Then she remembered. There was a woman, a few weeks before my father died. She came to our cottage late one night, frightened, injured. My father treated her, and let her sleep in the spare room. She was there for 3 days. She spent time in his study. She could have seen my handwriting. Do you remember what she looked like? Tall, elegant, golden hair, green eyes. Clara's voice dropped. She looked like Victoria. Alexander went very still. Victoria has a twin sister. They were separated at birth, some scandal involving their mother. The sister was sent away, raised in secret. I always assumed it was rumor, but if she was the woman who came to your father, she could have learned your handwriting. She could have written the letter. They want the journal, Clara breathed. And they want me dead. Yes, but now we know who we are fighting. Alexander's expression was grim. And Captain Blackwood's man has returned from Thornwood Hall. He found something. What? The young woman your father treated. The one who disappeared. She is not dead. She has been hiding in a village near the Scottish border for 2 years. And she is willing to talk. The journey to the village of Glenmara took 4 days. They travelled separately to avoid suspicion. Clara and Alexander in one carriage, Captain Blackwood, and a small retinue following. Victoria had protested loudly when Alexander announced he was taking his wife on a tour of the estate's northern holdings, but she could not prevent the journey without revealing her own agenda. The autumn landscape rolled past in a blur of gold and crimson. Clara sat beside Alexander, her mind churning. She is the missing piece, Alexander said, as though reading her thoughts. If her testimony matches the evidence in the journal, we will have enough to bring before the crown. And if it does not? Then we keep searching. He reached across and took her hand. I promised you I would find the truth. I intend to keep that promise. His touch was warm and steady. Clara had grown accustomed to his presence. The sound of his voice, the rhythm of his movements, the way his rare smiles made her feel like she had won some kind of victory. She was falling in love with him. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She was falling in love with a man who had married her by accident, a man whose real bride was waiting at home, plotting their destruction. She pulled her hand away. Is something wrong? Alexander asked. No, nothing. I am simply tired from the journey. He did not press. The carriage rolled on into the gathering dusk. Glenmara was a tiny village, perched on the edge of a wind-swept moor. A dozen stone cottages, a small church, and a tavern that looked ancient. The air was cold and clean, scented with peat smoke and heather. The woman they had come to meet was waiting in the church. Her name was Margaret Hale. She was perhaps 20 years old, though the lines around her eyes and the grey in her hair made her look older. She flinched at sudden movements, but her eyes were clear and intelligent. Your Grace, she curtsied awkwardly. Captain Blackwood's man said you wished to speak with me. About Dr. Bennett. Clara stepped forward. My father, Philip Bennett. You knew him. Margaret's eyes widened. You are his daughter? The schoolteacher? Yes. Clara's voice caught. He treated you before you disappeared. I need to know what happened. Margaret looked away, her thin hands twisting in her apron. I have been too afraid to speak of it, not since it happened. You are safe now, Alexander said quietly. Whatever you tell us, we will protect you. You have my word. For a long moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she took a deep breath, and the words poured out. She had been a maid at Thornwood Hall, a simple country girl working in the kitchens. She had been happy enough, until the night she witnessed something she was not meant to see. A meeting, late at night, in the Earl's private study. Men she did not recognize. Documents being signed, gold changing hands, and a name repeated again and again, Ravenshire. I did not understand what I had seen, Margaret said. her voice trembling. But I knew it was wrong. I tried to leave quietly, but one of the men saw me. He said I was a spy. He beat me. Then he threw me into a cellar and left me there. She had been held captive for 3 days. No food, no water, no light. On the 3rd night, a stable boy released her. He helped her escape through a hidden passage and told her to run. I wandered for days, half dead, until I collapsed on the road. That was when Dr. Bennett found me. He took me to his cottage. He treated my wounds. I told him everything. And then my father was killed, Clara whispered. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. I heard about it months later. I knew they had found him because of what I told him. I have been hiding ever since, too afraid to come forward. Clara took Margaret's hands. You have nothing to feel guilty about. My father chose to help you, and he would want you to be safe. But they are still out there, the Earl of Westbrook and his allies. If they discover I am alive, they will not hurt you, Alexander said firmly. You will come back to Ravenshire Castle under my protection, and when the time comes, you will testify. Can you do that? Margaret hesitated. Then she nodded. Yes, for Dr. Bennett. I will do it for him. The journey back was quiet. Margaret slept for most of the trip, exhausted. Captain Blackwood rode ahead with his men, and Clara sat beside Alexander, processing everything. We have enough now, she said. Margaret's testimony, combined with the journal. Yes, Alexander's voice was thoughtful. But there is something I do not understand. The conspiracy your father uncovered. It involves forged wills and stolen estates. Margaret said she heard my family's name mentioned, but what do the Ravenshire estates have to do with Westbrook? Clara pulled the journal from her traveling case. There is one property mentioned repeatedly, an estate in the north, a castle with 7 towers, surrounded by moorland and forest. The journal says it was stolen from its rightful owners 30 years ago, through a forged will. Alexander went very still. 7 towers, moorland and forest, that is Thornwood Hall, my family's ancestral seat. Clara stared at him. But how? My father died 30 years ago. He was 42. The physicians said heart ailment, but he had always been healthy. After his death, my mother discovered his will had been changed. The original left everything to her, with Thornwood Hall held in trust until I came of age. The new will divided the estate among distant cousins. It took my mother 10 years of legal battles to reclaim it. And during those 10 years, who controlled the estate? The Earl of Westbrook. He was appointed trustee. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. By the time my mother won the case, the estate was nearly bankrupt. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The conspiracy was not just about stolen estates. It was about murder. Alexander's father had been killed so Westbrook could seize control of Thornwood Hall. Westbrook killed your father, she said quietly, and my father discovered the truth. Yes, Alexander's voice was cold, and now we are going to prove it. They arrived at Ravenshire Castle to find chaos. Servants were running through the corridors. The great hall was in disarray, furniture overturned, tapestries torn from the walls, and at the center stood Victoria, her golden hair wild, her green eyes blazing with triumph. She is gone, Victoria announced, her voice ringing through the hall. Your precious impostor Duchess. She fled in the night with her accomplices. Clara stepped out from behind Alexander. I am right here, Lady Victoria. Victoria's expression flickered. Surprise, then fury, then something like fear, but she recovered quickly. You were supposed to be in the north. That is what I told you, Alexander interrupted. But I lied. I needed to see what you would do if you thought we were gone. He gestured around the devastated hall. What were you searching for? The journal? The evidence? Victoria's face contorted with rage. You tricked me. Yes, just as you tricked me. Alexander moved toward her, navigating the overturned furniture with practiced precision. I know about your sister. I know about the meeting at Thornwood Hall. I know about the forged wills and the murders. And I know that you and your sister have been working with Westbrook to finish what he started 30 years ago. You have no proof. I have a witness. Margaret Hale. She is under my protection and prepared to testify. Alexander's voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. "It is over, Victoria." For a long moment, Victoria stared at him. Rage, disbelief, desperation, then something like defeat. "Westbrook will destroy you," she hissed. "He has allies in the crown, in the courts. You think a maid's testimony and a dead physician's journal will bring him down? Perhaps, but he will not do it today." Alexander turned to Captain Blackwood, who had entered with a detachment of guards. "Arrest Lady Victoria. Hold her in the East Tower until the authorities arrive. And send word to London. We have evidence of a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government." Blackwood bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Victoria screamed as the guards took her arms. She fought and clawed and spat curses, but the guards held fast, and within moments she was dragged from the hall. Clara stood in the wreckage, her hands shaking. "What happens now?" Alexander turned toward her. "Now we present our evidence to the crown. We expose Westbrook and his allies, and we clear your father's name. And after that?" He crossed the distance between them and took her hands. "After that, we decide what kind of marriage we want to have. Because the truth is, Clara, I do not care about the circumstances that brought you to me. I only care that you are here now, that you make me feel like I am not broken." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the moment you stood up to Finch and demanded to be treated as the Duchess you were pretending to be. I will love you for the rest of my life, whether my sight returns or not." Clara could not speak, so instead, she kissed him. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. The world fell away, the ruined hall, the danger still lurking in shadows, and there was only him, only them. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love you, Alexander Ravenshire." The trial of the Earl of Westbrook lasted 6 months. Margaret Hale's testimony, combined with the evidence from Clara's father's journal, exposed a conspiracy operating for more than 3 decades. Forged wills, stolen estates, murders disguised as accidents. Dozens of noble families had been affected, and at the center was Westbrook, a man who had grown rich and powerful on the ruins of other people's lives. What emerged during the trial revealed the antagonist's true motivations. Westbrook was not simply greedy, he was driven by a desperate need to restore his family's fortunes after his own father had gambled away their inheritance. He had started with a single forgery 30 years ago and found himself trapped in an escalating cycle of crime. Each murder required another to cover it up. Each stolen estate demanded another to maintain the illusion. By the time Clara's father began investigating, Westbrook could not stop even if he had wanted to. As for Victoria, her motivation was equally layered. She was the legitimate daughter, raised in luxury but always aware that her twin sister had been cast out. Her mother had been forced to give up one child to avoid scandal, and Victoria had grown up with the knowledge that she owed her privileged existence to her sister's sacrifice. When that sister, bitter, damaged, hungry for revenge, approached Victoria with a plan to claim the Ravenshire fortune, Victoria agreed not solely out of greed, but out of a twisted sense of obligation. She had spent her entire life benefiting from her sister's suffering. This was, in her mind, the debt coming due. The journal was finally deciphered using the Vesalius book, which Captain Blackwood's men had recovered from Clara's cottage, hidden beneath a loose floorboard the ransackers had missed. The page numbers led to specific anatomical illustrations, and the Latin labels on those illustrations formed the key to the code. Clara's father, in his brilliance, had hidden the key in plain sight, knowing that only his daughter, who had grown up listening to him read from that book, would think to look there. When the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted. Westbrook was sentenced to life imprisonment. His allies were arrested. Victoria and her sister received lesser sentences for their roles in the conspiracy, but they too would spend years behind bars. Clara's father was posthumously cleared of all suspicion. His name was restored, his honor vindicated. But for Clara, the greatest victory came on a spring morning, 6 months after the trial ended. She was sitting in the garden, watching the roses bloom, when Alexander found her. He walked without an attendant now, a new habit he had developed since his surgery. The surgery had been performed 2 months after Victoria's arrest. a new procedure developed by a physician in Vienna, offering a chance, however slim, of restoring his sight. For 3 agonizing weeks, Alexander had been forced to keep his eyes bandaged. And then, one morning, the bandages came off. Clara had held his hand as the physician unwound the linen. She watched as Alexander blinked in the sudden light, his eyes struggling to focus. And then he looked at her, really looked at her. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking with wonder. "You are exactly as I imagined." Clara had cried. She could not help it. The tears had streamed down her face as she threw her arms around him. His sight never returned fully. The physicians said it might never be perfect, but he could see. He could see the sky and the trees and the roses blooming in the garden. He could see the faces of the servants who had served him faithfully. He could see the words in the books he had only been able to hear read aloud. And he could see her. Now, as he approached her in the garden, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Clara's heart began to pound. "Our first rings were chosen for us," Alexander said quietly, "by other people, for other reasons. I thought perhaps it was time we chose our own." Inside was a ring, a gold band set with a single sapphire that gleamed in the spring sunlight. Simple, elegant, perfect. "Are you asking me to marry you again?" "I am asking you to stay married to me. Not because you were forced, not because you had no choice, but because you want to. Will you be my wife, Clara Bennett, truly and completely?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her, as though it had been waiting for her all along. And when he kissed her, surrounded by the roses and the spring sunlight and the promise of all the years to come, Clara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she was finally home. 2 years later, the christening of Lady Eleanor Margaret Ravenshire was the grandest event Thornwood had seen in a generation. Guests arrived from every corner of the kingdom. The great hall was decorated with flowers from the castle gardens, and the chapel bells rang for a full hour in celebration. Clara stood at the front of the chapel, her daughter cradled in her arms. Eleanor was beautiful, dark hair like her father, green eyes like her mother, and a disposition so sunny the servants had nicknamed her Little Light. Alexander stood beside Clara, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. His sight had continued to improve. He would never have perfect vision, but he could read and write and watch his daughter's face as she slept, and he could look at Clara with an intensity that still made her heart flutter. "She is perfect," he murmured. "She is," Clara agreed. "Though I suspect she will be trouble when she is older. She has her father's stubbornness." "My stubbornness? I am not stubborn." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You spent 3 months refusing to admit you needed spectacles for reading. That was not stubbornness. That was pride. Which is a form of stubbornness." Alexander laughed. A warm, genuine laugh. "Very well. Perhaps she has my stubbornness, but she has your courage, and your kindness." The bishop finished the ceremony, and the congregation applauded. Clara and Alexander processed down the aisle, their daughter between them, and emerged into the bright spring sunshine. Margaret Hale was waiting outside. She had become a permanent fixture at Ravenshire Castle, serving as Clara's companion and Eleanor's unofficial godmother. Her testimony at Westbrook's trial had earned her a small pension from the crown, but she had chosen to stay with the family who had given her a second chance. "She was an angel," Margaret said, beaming. "Not a single cry." "She is saving her energy for later," Clara said. "She will be howling by midnight. Then we shall enjoy the peace while it lasts." Alexander took his daughter from Clara's arms, cradling her with practiced ease. "Come, little one. Everyone is desperate to meet the future Duchess of Thornwood." They walked together through the gardens, past the roses that had bloomed on the day Alexander proposed, past the fountain where they had shared their first kiss, past the bench where Clara had sat on countless afternoons reading aloud, while Alexander listened with his eyes closed. Clara thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The storm on her wedding night, the knife at her throat, the coded journal, the conspiracy, and the blind duke who had seen her more clearly than anyone else ever had. "I love you," she said, because the words still felt new and precious. Alexander turned to her, their daughter cradled in his arms, and smiled. "I love you too, Clara Ravenshire, more than words can say." And as they walked into the great hall, surrounded by the people they loved, and the life they had built together, Clara knew that every struggle, every moment of darkness, had been worth it. Because this was what she had been fighting for. This was her happily ever after. If this story touched your heart, take just 1 second to press that like button. It helps more than you know. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what was the moment that made you truly believe Alexander loved Clara? I read every single comment, and I cannot wait to hear your thoughts. Subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another unforgettable love story. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.